Alrighty, good morning to everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. We really thank you for your time. I know everyone's time is precious, especially this time of the year. Hopefully the content we have for you today will be of great value for you. I think you'll definitely see that there's quite a lot we want to cover today. We don't have that much time. We'll speed race through a few of these things, but I think it will definitely be good for all of you to see what we've got up our sleeves today for you. I'd like to just maybe make a few notes. If you want to use the chat box for questions and answers, if you want to use it as we go through the session, that will be great. We've got a few moderators that will have a look at all the questions that comes through. So if you want to just type that in, we'll get to the questions and answers at the end. So we've got 45 minutes to go through our agenda, and then we'll get to the questions and answers at the end for those people that's got to drop off at about in about 45 minutes. So what will you guys learn today in this webinar? MYOB has brought out a massive release called 2018.1. It's probably the biggest release that they've had up, thus far. There's more than 30, core changes to the product, and you'll see a lot of that today. So we want to touch on a lot of those with you today. We don't have that much time, and we will have deep dive sessions at later stages. We'll have webinars, so watch your inboxes for that, and we'll take you through all those detailed sessions later on as well. So after we've covered that, which Jeff will do for us, we'll then cover off year-end. It's that time of the year. Some people haven't gone through year-end procedures just yet with MYOB Advanced, so I'll aim is to take you through the best practices today and how to do that and the steps to follow. And we will then cover off STP. So everyone has heard of these STP. It's the ATO mandated single touch payroll. And so Vince will take us through everything we've got to do there, what it is, and kind of how we need to prepare for it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jeff to take us through 2018. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Leo. Well, let's get started on 2018.1. It's coming out over the next few months, and I'm sure you have lots of questions. We've mentioned it, but why is it such a big deal? How's it going? What's it going to offer you? What's going to be its impact? How are you going to prepare your users? When is it all happening? We'll answer these questions. So 2018.1 is actually being released over this quarter from July to September. And then later on in this year, I thought I'd just touch on a few of the things coming later on. We've got a whole area of security coming about, and then some new modules coming out in Q4 as well. So the roadmap for the 18 release, which is this quarter, so next month there'll just be 1 or 2 customers will be going on to 2018, but August and September is where the rest of you will be rolled out. You're probably asking, okay, when am I scheduled? We'll be sending out an email with the schedule of the updates. Up till now, MYOB and all the partners have been working in collaboration, testing out 2018. We've been especially focused on anybody who had customizations, ensuring there's a smooth transition, and we're testing all the features and functions as we speak. As I mentioned, later on, there's some security features coming in. Again, this is a government mandated function as well. There's two-factor authentication being introduced in the fourth quarter, plus enhanced user security. So when somebody logs on, they need to be registered and different things like that. First optional, later on it's going to be more and more enforced. There's a lot of new government legislation in this whole area of security, and MYOB is on the front foot in terms of keeping up to date on this. So what will actually happen when you log on when 2018 is released for you? So the users will log in and they'll have a new splash screen. That's the first thing. So nothing dramatic here, but at least you'll know, oh, I'm on 2018 this morning. But what actually happens when you get into it? So there's basically a enhanced platform. The platform has been enhanced. In particular, the user interface, there's been some changes there, especially in the menus, and there's a variety of other changes throughout the system there. There's some work on dashboards. There's a concept called Device Hub, and they're using a lot of lists as entry points, and we can share our configuration more easily. But let's have a little sneak peek at this. This is your old user interface. You're all familiar with it. Suites at the top, modules, navigation pane on the left. This will be replaced with something that more looks like this. The concept is workspaces, replace the suites and modules. It's all configurable. You can define your workspaces. You can define your menu on the left-hand side. You can set things up that you frequently use as tiles. It's personalizable by the user. And the good thing is if people are a little confused at the beginning, you can always switch to the classic UI. It's just one little tick box and you switch over on an individual user basis. But this will give you more of a workspace to work in, everything that you need on your quick menu without the clutter of everything else. So in your current version, when you open up a particular form, say be it customers or sales order entry, any of the managed forms or any of the transaction forms, you go directly to the form. We're all familiar with that. There are some limitations there. This will be replaced with the concept of a list as an entry point. Some of you are probably already familiar with the leverage overviews. It's using the same technology. It's basically MYOB is calling them as entry point lists. We've called them overviews to date, but this is introduced across the whole system. There's over 140 of these in the system. These have been enhanced even further in the 2018 releases. We have a concept of quick filters. These are pre-set up or customizable. You can just click and drag them there. But it lets you see the big picture. So when you're dealing with customers or transactions, you want to see the big picture first. What do I need or what do I need to focus on today? Okay, so you might have your overdue records on one of the filters already, or you may have the documents that you're responsible for on your screen. But it also allows you to do mass updates. You can add, depending on the options which are turned on, you can add, you can delete records, you can perform mass updates, you can perform mass actions, such as I want to release a whole lot of records. It's configurable and personalizable by the user. So you can focus on for instance, you may want to focus on particular columns, so you can remove those columns and just show the columns which are applicable to you. Of course, like I was saying, you can add new records, you can edit new records all from this screen. And then those screens can be opened up in a new tab, or they can be a pop-up. So you've got a lot of flexibility about how those new screens come up for you as well. Moving on, there's quite a few enhancements in the reporting side. I've mentioned already the generic inquiries, the addition of new, making it more user-friendly on the generic inquiries. But there's also a concept of pivot tables. They've already introduced them previously. Some of you are using them to quite a bit of satisfaction. But they've introduced some seemingly simple enhancements here, but actually it's going to make it easier to set up new pivot tables, make it easier to use new pivot tables. The concept they've introduced is, one of the concepts they've introduced is parts. So if you have a segmented field, and many of you have segmented fields for your sub-accounts, now it's very easy to actually say, I want to analyze my data based on the department or the area or the region or whatever you want to use there. Previously, you had to go into the generic inquiry, you had to modify it, you had to basically add complexity to the generic inquiry to pull that data out in a separate column. Now it's inherent in the pivot table. I can just go in there and I want to view it by department today, cost center tomorrow. You can click and drag and move these things around quite easily. In the same way, they've also introduced what they call date parts. Same concept is now you can just use the date field and be able to analyze it by the year or the month or the week, even down to the minute. So if your field includes minutes and hours, then I can say, show me my sales that I get in the morning versus the sales I get in the afternoon. It's straightforward, but what it's done is it's made it simpler to use these pivot tables, simpler to set up. Dashboards is another area of improvement. They've done some overall improvement in consistency and simplicity in terms of setting up the dashboards, but they've also introduced a facility to be able to, when you are on a dashboard, to be able to put in a parameter. Say your dashboard is showing you all your company sales figures. And the salesman could go in there, if we have the parameter set up, so they can select the salesperson, they can just put their salesperson identification in there, and then they're just seeing the breakdown for themselves. So it allows you to sort of slice the data more easily, and so that you can focus on relevant data. Also, filters can be set up at the dashboard level rather than back at the inquiry level. Again, it just basically makes the setup more easy and gives you more flexibility. Distribution, for those of you who are in the distribution business, there's quite a few changes in the distribution, item class hierarchy, pricing and units of measure improvements. And then especially in the area of the order entry, there's quite a few changes. Let's have a little look at this. One concept they've introduced is called quick order processing. So now, if you configure a quick order process for a particular order type, then with one click, you can process the order and take it all the way through to invoicing or whatever stage that you want it to go to. So you could go, I want to do the order today, I want to do this order, I want to create the picking slip, and I may want to print the picking slip, but that's as far as I want to go. On the other hand, it may be a case that you do the order, you print a picking slip, but you know you have the stock, so you want to do the confirmation and you want to produce the invoice. Maybe you don't want to release the invoice, but you want to print it or email the invoice all in one go, and the invoice may get printed in one place and the confirmation may get printed on a different printer. You can also set this up via branches as well with different printers. So it's just simplifying that process where it is applicable. The item class or hierarchy is really just recognizing that customers that you think of, when you're thinking of your items, you just don't think of it as class A, B, C, D. Within class A, you may have subclasses, and then you might have subclasses within that, and then you may have subclasses within that. So they've introduced this concept of an item class hierarchy. This obviously is going to impact your sales analysis. It's going to impact if you're pushing things out to a pivot table, then you'll be able to analyze all the way down that item class hierarchy. If you're using Power BI, then that'll push all the way through over to there as well, some business intelligence tools. So definitely in terms of sales analysis or any type of analysis, it's a great enhancement in that area. But also you can then have a deeper level of controls on the system as well. So your availability calculations, your default posting classes, your general ledger aspects. So it gives you all that capability there, but you don't lose what you've done at the moment. You can transition to this quite easily. You can use the entry point screens to do mass updates, that's what we saw earlier. So you'll be able to select all these items. I want to give it subclass ABC. These other items, DEF, and do a mass update, and then you're off and running. Units and measure and pricing improvements, pricing and discounting. They've introduced quite a few new concepts in this area. We've got prices by warehouses. So then if your warehouse is in WA, you might have an uplift of price to cover your freight. So basically you've got the pricing by warehouse. If somebody buys from a different warehouse, then they're getting that new price. There's a concept of a price adjustment multiplier, so that you can price at a base unit of measure, but when you sell it in pallets, instead of multiplying it by 64 or whatever number of boxes there are on a pallet, you might multiply it by 60 because they're getting a pallet discount, an inherent pallet discount. You've got cross-reference units of measure, so that when you're talking to your customer or supplier, you're using their units of measure as well as their part numbers. And being able to upload a supplier's catalogue using their ID rather than your ID just makes the upload of supplier catalogues that much easier. Financials has some very key updates in this area. I'm going to go over a few of these. First one is this area of the separation of branches and companies. In effect, they've introduced a third layer of organisation here. Previously, and they've changed the wording here. Previously, you had companies, and for those of you, quite a lot of you have got multiple companies. And then you can have multiple branches within each of those companies, and those branches were legal entities. Now they've renamed it. It's a bit of common sense renaming. Companies are now called tenants. The legal entities, which are previously branches, are now called companies. And then you can have a multitude of operational branches underneath those companies. And each of those companies can be what they call balancing companies, balancing branches, balancing branches, so that you can do inter-branch accounting there if need be, or they can be non-balancing branches. They can be just basically operational branches. It means it introduces another level in your financial reporting as well. So you've got reporting at the company level and reporting at the branch level or branch within the company. So it's another level so you can do operational branch reporting within a company now.
Guys, I can see that a few of you are already typing some questions there. That's fantastic. Keep them coming. We can see them coming through. So if you've got any questions as we go through, please just type in the chat box and we'll get to them at the end. Thank you.
Tax by company is a significant enhancement. We've all been looking for this, you as well as us. So now you can close your tax by company independently, and also if one company is on quarterly and another company is on monthly, it supports that as well. So you don't have to close currently all the branches within a company at the same time. Now you can close them independently, or what we call now all the companies rather than the branches. In the area of approvals, they've introduced approvals across a lot more business objects, including cash inwards and cash outwards. Most applicable will be the cash outwards if you want another level of approval there before monies go out. Statements, again, this is something we've been looking forward to for some time. We've got statements on demand now. We've also got different aging buckets as part of the standard product, days or monthly aging, and we have aging by due date or document date. So you can choose which way you want to go depending on which group of customers have been assigned that statement cycle. And also you can do weekly statements and that as well if need be. Pay to vendors is just like we have on the customer side. We have parent-child customers. Now you've got parent-child vendors. So if you need to pay the head office of a vendor, then that's been introduced. There is a concept of migration mode. It's more applicable when you're doing take-on. But it's a great facility for if you have a lot of history that you want to bring into the system. Now we've got the migration mode so that history doesn't sort of impact all the other different sub-ledgers. You can just bring in the history without impacting the general ledger and even without impacting your inventory. Retainage. This is, so you have the retainage facility for accounts receivable and accounts payable. You might want to use it in accounts payable, but you probably don't want to use it in accounts receivable. It is what they say there. You can raise a supplier invoice and say, I want to retain 10% of that until I'm satisfied. Maybe it's a warranty period is finished or something like that. Currencies and currency rounding, they've introduced more flexibility there in terms of being able to round for currencies. And moving on now to customer relationship management. There's a whole lot of new changes there for those of you who are using opportunities or marketing list. I'll just skip through these quickly. First of all, in the approval maps and the assignment maps, they've separated those two out. Previously, they were one map. They've increased the scope of the approval map so you can apply it to more business objects, sales orders, approvals, and different things like that. But they've also introduced some quite simple but quite powerful new features there in terms of doing consecutive, doing concurrent approvals. So it's just easier to set up and more powerful. Looking forward to using that for some of you sites which are using approvals quite comprehensively. Just make it a lot easier there. In the marketing side, we've been restricted to date in terms of I want to create a new marketing list or I want to do a campaign. When you presented a list or you want to add the customers in there that you want on that list. So it was a little bit laborious in terms of how you select those customers. Now we've got a lot more flexibilities. You do need to know how to use a generic inquiry. So you'll probably be asking for some training in that area. But once you've got that, it gives us a great deal of flexibility in terms of, I want to get this select list of customers who have purchased more than $5,000 in this year or something like that. You can incorporate that into this quite easily. So we're looking forward to that. The other area there is if you're using opportunities, as you know, you are presented with a list of stages. So this was a set list of stages that we could modify, but now they've introduced flexibility. So for each opportunity class, you can have your own set of stages. We have campaign tracking of the expenses, where you can put your expenses on a campaign to a project and track those costs. And another interesting one is the quotes in the opportunities. So now we can raise multiple quotes from an opportunity, decide which is the one that we want that has been chosen, and then generate the quote, then produce that quote turned into a sales order, all linked back to the opportunity. Project. It's the smallest list of new features, but it's actually probably the most comprehensive list. In terms of the release notes, for instance, a third of the release notes just deals with projects. There's a great deal of changes. Rather than calling them changes, let's call them enhancements to the project side of things. We have a whole more simplified budget and reporting budget and reporting. So we've separated out the revenue and the cost budgets. we have a concept of pro forma invoices, which is very, very powerful. You can review the pro forma invoice. You can change things on that pro forma invoice. You can add adjustments on the pro forma invoice. Okay. There's been enhancements in the progress billing and the fixed price billing, and we've introduced more flexibility on the transaction-based billing. The billing rules has been enhanced. It was quite simple previously. Now they've introduced more rules in that area, so it gives you more power there. And in the project pricing, they call it enhanced project rates, but it's really in the pricing area. Now we can actually go back to the pricing that's as part of distribution and use that pricing as part of the pricing that is in the projects. The user interface has been enhanced, there's more reporting, and they've introduced the tracking of purchase order and sales order commitments. So when you look at a project, you've got your cost that you've incurred, but quite often you also want to see your committed cost as well, be it from a revenue point of view, be it from an expense point of view. But all projects, guess what? You get change orders. Okay, so we want to be able to manage those change orders. So there's a whole concept of change order management that's been introduced there. And one that I'm quite excited about is these cost codes. So it's similar to the sub-account concept you're all using, most of you, nearly all of you are using today. So it's a similar concept of that, but allows us finer dissection of the incoming cost and the revenue side as well. So you can do, it introduces much more flexibility without having to introduce a lot more task. And then we also have retainage there as well. So that brings me to the end of my section. So now I'm going to hand it back to Leo for a minute.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I think as you guys can see, there's quite a lot coming up, and we're really excited about this new release. So I'm sure you're all very eager to get onto it. So what I'll do is I'll hand over now to Vince to take us through year-end processing, specifically with MYOB Advanced. As you guys know, that it's a date-driven system. There's no specific rollover function, but there's a lot of housekeeping and processes to follow. For a lot of you, you might not have gone through this before. So what Vince will do is just take us through those best practices. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks, Leo, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Well, it's that time of year again. We thought this was an opportune time to look at the year-end processes, as Leo said. In fact, he stole a bit of my thunder, but that's okay. MYOB have published what they call a quick guide, covering off on month and year-end processes. So for our purposes this morning, I'm just going to deal with this at a very high level. Obviously, there's more detail in the quick guide that will be sent out to all of you in due course. As far as year-end processes are concerned, I've sort of approached it in two broad areas, if you like. General housekeeping across all the modules or subsidiary ledgers, if you like, and the actual formal year-end procedures. As Leo said, it is a date-driven system. There is no system rollover as such. Essentially, all we do is close off the current financial year and make sure, obviously, we've got the next financial year created and open. We'll see that as we get into the presentation. With regard to housekeeping, a lot of these steps are not necessarily restricted to year end. Realistically, it's best practice to be doing these on a daily basis. Okay, the first step is just to ensure, as always, that all transactions have been posted. I'm going to open up the next point because I want to use this screen as well. I haven't got it showing on this screen here, but in relation to posting all the transactions, we'll be in the same screen, but on the Daily Processes tab that I'm sure you're familiar with, in the left-hand navigation pane, under the Daily sub-menu option, there would be an option in this particular case called Release Inventory Documents, okay? And there you would see any inventory transactions that actually haven't been released or processed. you could either process them all or process them selectively. So just ensuring that all transactions have been processed. The next step would be to validate the balances. I've highlighted that menu option, the screenshot there. And essentially all that's happening here is the system is just validating the transactions against the master data, if you like. I've had a few calls in the past, for example, where a customer's balance doesn't agree with their outstanding invoices, if you like. We just go in for validating the balances in the accounts receivable module in this particular example, for example, and that will rectify those balances there. Next step would be to reconcile the balances to the general ledger from the subsidiary module. And clearly this is an important step. In the reports tab of all the modules, if you like, there is a report. In this particular case here, it's accounts receivable, balance by account. Now, this is just the standard report, and I've highlighted the section there. It's not particularly conspicuous, if you like, where it's referring to the account in the general ledger that the transactions beneath that refer to, okay? Simply just a matter of going to the reports tab within the accounts receivable module. Similarly, there's a similar report for inventory and accounts payable, etc. The next screen is just a couple of pages into that report, okay, where we see the balance of that particular general ledger account that I highlighted earlier on. And naturally, this is what the balance that we would expect to see in that general ledger account. If not, then we're rolling back to through our reconciliation process just to understand why. On this particular screenshot, there are other control accounts for accounts receivable, as you can see there, the account and in the general ledger and the sub-account as well. That's reconciling balances to the general ledger from the subsidiary ledgers. Obviously, we're going to do our final reconciliation cash management. That's pretty straightforward. Run currency revaluations where anyone is using multi-currency. Fixed assets. It's always a good idea, just any capital purchases, just make sure that's been converted into a fixed asset in the fixed asset module from accounts payable, if that's the process that you're using, and obviously post final depreciation for the year in fixed assets. Prepare and release the tax reports. Okay. I've had a few calls in the past where customers have prepared the tax report for a tax period, and then when they're going to prepare their BAS, I get a call saying the tax report is saying X for a particular tax ID, and I know there's more transactions in there. And that's often the case where the tax report has been prepared and there have been transactions posted subsequent to that, okay, that the tax report hasn't actually picked up. In that case, you just simply go back, void that tax report, okay, and run it again. It'll pick up those relevant transactions, and once you're happy, you can release the tax report and that will close the tax period. Similarly, we would close off the financial periods in all the subsidiary ledgers. In this particular case here, I've got the closed financial period screen for accounts receivable. There is a similar screen in all the subsidiary ledgers. Okay. I guess at this point I should mention this is not a reversible step. If you close a financial period, you can't reopen it. We generally recommend that you just deactivate the relevant period within the general ledger, and in that case you obviously can't post any transactions from any subsidiary ledger to the general ledger. There are some customers that do actually choose to close off a financial period. That's fine. In this particular case here, if that's the practice that you're using, you wouldn't be seeing these financial periods as you close them off. Just be a simple, if we're closing June period in accounts receivable, for example, we would just check this particular period, right? click on close periods, and it would disappear from this particular screen here. That basically takes us into our year-end procedure. Now, the first step here is to take a backup or a snapshot, as we say, or indeed, if you want to be even more cautious, you can go through the whole process in a test environment, largely because some of the steps that we're taking here, again, are not reversible. And clearly, if we want to investigate any issues or transactions within the year, then we have that option to go back and review that. First step, create the new financial year if you haven't already done so. This is the screen here. Just simply a matter of entering the new financial year, adding the new record, and then generating the periods and saving that. This is within the general ledger, financial periods. So we're taking a snapshot, creating a new financial year. I'm just getting the hurry up here, so I'll just move through this pretty quickly. Again, similarly to all the subsidiary ledgers, we just want to confirm all transactions are posted to the GL. Okay, again, under the Daily Processes tab, you'll have an option there to post all transactions. Print the financial reports. Okay, trial balance sheet if you're using cash flow reporting, cash flow report, and budgets and forecasts if you're using those as well. You can validate account history within the general ledger module as well. It's good practice. And then finally close the last financial period exactly as we did within the subsidiary modules. You saw earlier on where we created the next financial year and those relevant periods. Okay, that's why it was up front. We obviously want to have our next financial year period open before we close off the last one. At that point, it's just simply a matter of confirming that all the year-end processes have completed successfully. Going back to the previous screen, you would now see that the new financial year in this particular year would now be visible. So that would be the first check, hence the comment there, periods for new financial year. Naturally, print off the P&L and balance sheets for the new year. Okay, and I guess the next 2 points should be sub-points of that. Within the balance sheet, just want to make sure that the income has been moved to retained earnings, so either the loss or income, and obviously in the P&L that all the balances have been zeroed out for the new financial year. And that's our year completed.
Thank you very much, Vince. As you guys know, we will also cover the single touch payroll quickly. The ATO mandate, obviously this change coming into effect 1 July for people with a certain amount of employees. So I will ask Vince to just take us through STP and how it relates to MYOB Advanced. We will specifically focus on what it is and what you need to do to be ready for the big change that's coming up. Thank you, Vince.
Thanks again, Leo. Okay, single touch payroll. So what is single touch payroll? Well, it's been touted as the most significant change in a decade. That's by the ATO. I recall about 10 years ago, the ATO launched an initiative called Standard Business Reporting. And I guess it's culminated in single touch payroll. In fact, for some of our customers that are running payroll today, if you look at the payroll preferences screen, you'll see a tab there for standard business reporting. That's been the first iteration of single touch payroll. What is it exactly? It's just simply a matter of reporting your payrolls as they're processed or as they occur to the ATO. So at the end of each pay, the employer's got to report all that information to the ATO. Just because that's being reported by payroll, there's no end of year reporting to the ATO on the part of the employer, and it's not necessary to submit payment summaries to the employees any further. So in some respects, it could be regarded as a benefit. Why is it being introduced? I guess it depends on your point of view. From the ATO's perspective, it's largely compliance. We talk about aligning the payroll with regular reporting. When you submit your single touch payroll, the relevant fields in the BAS will be updated automatically, the W1 and W2 fields, that's for the employers. Again, it's to identify non-compliance more quickly. These are actual reasons coming from the ATO. Better collection of unpaid entitlements to the employees, and as always, to penalise employers who repeatedly offend. So clearly we're talking about something that we need to take fairly seriously. Having said that, there are clearly benefits on both sides. You know, for the employers and the employees. The employees can get a MyGov login from the ATO, and they'll be able to go in and view their pays and just ensure that their superannuation payments have been made, etc. What will be reported and when? Okay, as I mentioned earlier on, essentially you're reporting each pay run as it happens. It's year-to-date payments, obviously salaries and wages, PAYG withholding tax, and superannuation payments. And as I mentioned earlier, it's for each completed pay run. The ATO refer to this as a pay event. Now, I've had some questions to date. What if the pay run isn't correct? Look, that's fine, because as I mentioned, we're essentially reporting year-to-date figures. So that would be corrected in the next pay run. And in some applications, there's actually an update event where it actually goes back and corrects those pays. So how do we get ready for single touch payroll? From the ATO's perspective, it's a matter of the number of employees. If you have 20 more employees from the 1st of April, then you have to be compliant from the 1st of July 2018. 19 or less, then we have an option to start from the 1st of July 2019. We would prefer to have all of our customers running payroll compliant as soon as possible. There is on the website a document there where you can actually verify the headcount from the 1st of April. Hopefully, you have an AusKey. This is a login that's given to you from the ATO, and access to what they call the ATO Access Manager. We'll be using this to firstly register our customers for standard business reporting. That's the first step. To do that, we have to request a my.myob login from MYOB. I can do that on your behalf. Then we do the registration for standard business reporting, which is a mandatory step for a single touch payroll. From the customer's perspective, it's simply a matter of just making sure that all the mandatory data is up to date. Clearly, well, certainly in the case of employees, there is validation checks before the payroll file is sent, and if any data is missing or in an incorrect format, it will actually fail. Having said that, there's a lot more preparation on our part in relation to pay items and various things that need to be configured correctly before the single touch payroll can be submitted. I'll just wrap it up quickly. This is a release schedule from MYOB. We are currently in pilot phase, and I'm sure we'll get an announcement from MYOB shortly for an update for all our customers, and which time we'll be able to start using single touch payroll. With that, I will hand back to Leo.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. I think, guys, just to make another note there is we've got you covered in terms of us and MYOB. So if you've got any questions on the payroll, I do know not everybody run MYOB Advanced people, but for those of you that do get in touch if you've got a question. So we'll move over to questions and answers. We've received obviously quite a lot of different questions. We won't have time to answer all of them, but if any of you have any other questions after this recording, we will obviously send out the recording back to everybody. But if you've got any other questions, please get in touch with me, Vince, or Jeff. and we will be gladly answering any of your other questions you've got there. So there's a few questions here we'll quickly touch on. One of them, does the tenant then do the consolidation? I think that's aimed, Jeff, at you with regards to the new tenant structure with the companies.
Yeah, but if you have a consolidation company, then that ends up being just a consolidation company. That consolidation company can be across multiple tenants. So the tenant is...
so essentially, the tenant, Jeff, is the old company. So you can still, right, do your consolidation to a tenant.
Yes.
But then we've also got the ability to consolidate multiple tenants, correct?
That's correct.
Into a different tenant.
Yeah. Okay. You still have that facility, so it's much the same. Yeah. Previously, you'd say you'd set up a consolidation. You might set up a consolidation company, or you set up a consolidation branch. So it's really all the same there.
All right, awesome. We've got another question. We don't have too much time. We'll cover the next one off as well. Is there any provision to get GST report?
Yep, there is in the system already. I mentioned earlier on under financials, taxes in the sub-menu, and just prepare tax report. And then from there, you can actually release the tax report, as I mentioned earlier on. If you're not sure, then feel free to give me a call.
Yeah, well, we can get back to you on that particular point to ensure that you have the reports that you need.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much, guys, for your time this morning. I know it's it's a busy time of the year, so really appreciate your attendance today. Hopefully, it was worth the time and there was value in what we've given you. We will send out the recording to everybody and also the quick guide on the year-end processes to each of you. And we'll hopefully see you in the next session where we'll cover the deep dive features of the new version. Thank you very much.